what the Ukrainians had in mind was, one, to demonstrate that Ukraine can generate an offense and that the war is not stalemated for the very reason that you implied there. They want continued political will from the United States and Europeans and even Asians who are supporting them not to give up on them, that there's plenty of opportunity for Ukraine to take back territory and also to punish Russia. I think also another reason for it, the military aspect of it, was to destroy as much of the military capability as they could that has been impacting on Ukraine proper from Russia proper, and also force the Russians to move forces from their offensive that they're conducting in the Donbass region to have to deal with this salient military term that the Ukrainians have achieved. And that is happening as we speak.
Russia now, though, where for the first time Ukraine says it's using Western rocket systems to destroy bridges and other infrastructure in the Kursk region. Today's also seen the largest Ukrainian drone attack on Moscow of the war to date. Let's speak to General Jack Keane, who's a retired four-star US Army general and the chair of the Institute for the Study of War, which is tracking Ukrainian and Russian troop movements. Jack, good evening. Does this mean then that NATO is technically aiding a military action in Russia?
Yeah, well, certainly Western weapon systems are being used, direct fire weapons, long-range weapons as well. Not the long-range ATACMs, because they're restricted from being used in Russia, which is really an absurd restriction. But the armor vehicles that they're using to make the attack, largely Western armor vehicles. Certainly the artillery that's being used is just about every type of major platform or munition that is being used has been acquired from the West. Not the least of which is some drones that we provided them. But the Ukrainians, as you know, have developed actually tens of thousands of drones themselves.
What do we make of this drone attack on Moscow then? And the purpose of it? What's the strategy there?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things in mind. Strategically, I really believe that most people thinking about the war in Ukraine think it's stalemated. And I wrote a 2-page article in the New York Post here in America who requested an article be done on Ukraine. And myself and the think tank put something together, mainly to demonstrate, largely to an American audience, that the war really is not stalemated when you get into the details of it. But the general perception is that it is, and certainly my little article isn't changing that perception. So I think what the Ukrainians had in mind was, one, to demonstrate that Ukraine can generate an offense and that the war is not stalemated for the very reason that you implied there. They want continued political will from the United States and Europeans and even Asians who are supporting them not to give up on them, that there's plenty of opportunity for Ukraine to take back territory and also to punish Russia. I think also another reason for it, the military aspect of it, was to destroy as much of the military capability as they could that has been impacting on Ukraine proper from Russia proper, and also force the Russians to move forces from their offensive that they're conducting in the Donbass region to have to deal with this salient military term that the Ukrainians have achieved. And that is happening as we speak.
Okay. I take that point very much so. Can I ask you, there's an interesting element to this story, isn't there? And Ukraine's incursion in Russia, drone strikes on Moscow now. And that is that Zelensky naturally didn't ask for permission to do this from NATO or Western allies. What would have happened if he had?
Well, if he asked the United States, I don't know about NATO or European countries individually. The United States probably would not have said no, but would have discouraged it. Much as we have been trying to discourage a lot of activities that Prime Minister Netanyahu is attempting to do in fighting his war. I mean, I absolutely find it quite unprecedented that we have civilian policymakers in the United States government, from the president on down,
Yeah.
trying to dictate how wars should be fought in Gaza and also in Ukraine.
Okay.
But I think that's probably what they would have tried to do if they asked them, is just discourage it.
Okay.
Because they don't want to take any risk of Russia escalating. And the Europeans, as you probably well know, starting last year, had come to the conclusion that Russia is bluffing. It's a false claim about escalation. They never have. And they forced the tanks on the Americans. They forced the long-range missile systems on the Americans. And they forced the F-16s on the Americans, all with the thought that none of those systems would force Russia to escalate. And that actually has been proven to be the case.
Right, okay. So far as those long-range missiles are concerned, just very briefly, Jack, 'cause I'm already over time, but so far as those long-range missiles, long-range weaponry being used is concerned, Zelensky is asking for permission, basically. There is an American ban on those being used. Do you think it is legitimate for America to lift that ban to allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles to get further into Russian territory?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think if they had that capability, it's unlikely they would have made this incursion. And I'm hoping that I think was the third reason I would have gotten around to, is demonstrating to the American policymakers, please release the restriction on long-range systems now that we have moved 35 kilometers into Russian territory, and seeing the accomplishments that have taken place there as a result of it.
Okay, Jack, thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it. General Jack Keane, who's a retired 4-star US Army General, chair of the Institute for the Study of War, with us on Times Radio tonight. You can read a really interesting dispatch from Ukraine. We've been on the front line there. The Times have been on the front line there over the last couple of days. So you get a bit of a sense of the mood and the morale and the feeling, the raw feeling on the ground. We're talking here about strategy and about geography and the politics of it. You cannot get to that without thinking about the raw feeling on the ground. You can read more on that in your copy of the Times tomorrow.